Jesus' birth deals with our enemies. That doesn't sound very Christmassy, does it? I tend to think Christmas is about peace on earth and mercy mild. And it is, of course. But it's also about our enemies being defeated. And that's what we see in this bit of Luke's account of Jesus' life. Verse 74 and 75 of chapter 1 bring enemies into Christmas. He has raised up a horn of salvation to rescue us from the hand of our enemies and to enable us to serve him without fear in holiness and righteousness before him all our days. Zechariah bursts into song as his speech is restored after he says that his boy's name is John. And at the heart of this song is God's deliverance of his people from their enemies. You might say, well, what enemies? We're not at war, we're not an occupied nation, what enemies? Well, to understand these verses, it's probably quite helpful that we're not involved in some conflict like that, because otherwise we might be tempted to sort of just take these verses and claim them for our own particular thing, our own national squabble or difficulty, as I think the Jews of Jesus' day were tempted to do, to take God's promises and to think they would apply just to them and the Roman Empire. But actually these verses are much, much bigger. Well, who are our enemies? Well, as people, we all have an enemy, Satan. The 3rd chapter of the Bible reveals him to be our enemy. He's a liar and a murderer right from the beginning. And he delights to bring, to blight our lives with sin and sickness and bitterness and fighting, and ultimately with death. But also, the same chapter gives us God's promise of one born of a woman who would crush the serpent's head, who would end Satan's reign of terror. So there's Satan. Christians also have a fight with what the Bible calls the world, the God-rejecting culture and the society around us, opposed politely sometimes, violently at other times, to Christian faith and to God's people. But closest of all to home is the enemy that's actually within each of us, that bit of us which is kind of ourselves. The Bible calls it the flesh, that doesn't love God's ways, that wants to go our own way and is against God's spirit and his ways. And so all we've said there is the world, the flesh and the devil. Those are enemies that all of us face, and that Jesus' coming addresses. As Zechariah sings, God has come to rescue us. And the more aware we are of these enemies, the greater will our joy be as we remember Jesus' first coming, the first Christmas, and as we look forward to his coming again at the end of time.